Blessed Beltane beloveds, it is Angie Yingst, and I'm here with your Beltane history, lore, ideas, all those things. So I've done this for a few years, like a few years ago, and then I skipped last year, and I thought, oh, I'll revisit these. So hopefully they make sense. Some of my understandings have changed, so some of the info changes, and I just like to update y'all. Okay, so as the wheel turns, of course, the grass grows greener right now. Something in the earth is waking up, and we sort of talked about that with Imulk and with Ostera. In Imulk, the seeds are stirring below the soil, and in Ostera, they're starting to pop out, and definitely in Beltane, we are seeing the flowers blossom and their pollen heaving and enticing the pollinators, the bees and the hummingbirds, to begin their sacred work. And of course, this is not really subtle energy. This is life insisting on itself, and we're starting to see everything blossom. So, greater sabbats on the pagan wheel of the year are the cross-quarter holidays, and that's what we call the earth festivals as compared to the solar festivals that mark the equinoxes and solstices, where the sun is in relation to the earth. The earth festivals are they're about 6 weeks between the equinox and the solstice, or the solstice and the equinox, and they were traditionally festivals of harvest and kind of honoring the agrarian calendar and the agrarian movement. So Beltane is one of the cross-quarter festivals on the Celtic calendar, and a greater Sabbath on the Wiccan calendar, marking the threshold between summer and spring and summer. So yes, this used to be thought of as the first day of summer, and so traditionally observed on May 1st, or the eve before even. It was a festival of summer, festival of fire and fertility and full-bodied aliveness. Historically, Beltane was a pastoral festival, and so fires, what were called need fires, were lit on hilltops, and the cattle were driven between them for protection and blessing before being released into the summer pastures. And these fires weren't just symbolic, they were practical magic. They were protection and purification and survival, because at its root, Beltane is about life, and life continuing, and life thriving, and life multiplying. Now, if you look at the pagan wheel of the year, or the Wiccan wheel of the year, on the other side is Samhain, which is, what we know as Halloween, that time of the year. So, if Beltane is about life, on the other side, Samhain is about death. So they do, kind of do a yin-yang kind of idea here, but they're both incredibly important times of the year spiritually. So over time, that idea of life became associated with fertility in all forms of the land, of the body, of creativity, of desire. There was an honoring of, sex and unions and marriages. And so there are stories, some historical, some mythic, of lovers meeting in the fields, of unions formed under the cover of the night, of which were called greenwood marriages. Whether literal or layered through time, the message is clear. This is the season of unions, of taking risks, of saying yes to life. And so you'll often hear Beltane described through the union of the masculine and the feminine, the horned god and the maiden goddess, the green man and earth herself. So I know you're kind of like, hey, but Angie, on Yule, you said that Mother Earth birthed the sun god. And it's like, okay, yes, but she is now the maiden goddess. So we think of the goddess in its triple form, maiden, mother, and crone. And so each day on, the 8 points on the wheel of the year, we're either honoring the maiden, the mother, or the crone. And so, we honor the crone in the dead of winter. In the spring, we're really looking at the maiden goddess, and this is when they procreate. Don't think too much about it, okay? Don't get too deep. It's not really like that. So there's symbolic frameworks, and while they, come from older mythic structures, we do hold them a little more expansively now. Because really what we're honoring here at Beltane is the meeting of energies that create something new. We often talk about this, like in tarot, we talk about it in terms of the Empress, right? The Empress is the masculine and feminine coming together for pregnancy. And so there's that idea too, that there's a combination, combining of masculine and feminine energy. And so there's that spark, not necessarily like bad tension, but the tension of those two things where they have to come together for potential to become form. So we see this echoed in later traditions too, like through May Day celebrations and the maypole, the ribbons weaving in and out in patterns that mirror connection, relationship, and interdependence. And how they would be honored is, there's a big phallic pole right in the middle of the square, and then there's a wreath put on top of it. That's the yonic symbol of, the symbol of the female is put on top. So it really does have that yonic phallic combo. And then there's all these big ribbons that come out, and they're all different colors, and they would be lined up. The boys would face one way, the girls would face the other way. And they would go boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl, and then weave up and under, up and under. And so they were weaving out, and, whether they're specifically intended as fertility rites, it doesn't quite matter because the symbolism remains. Life is starting to weave itself together. And so we're really honoring on the eve of Beltane, which, we think of Beltane as May 1st, but really we think of this celebration starting the evening of the 31st, because we're kind of lighting the bonfire and moving into Beltane that way. So this would be a traditional time for celebrating and honoring the blossoming flowers, the fertility, the possibility of our harvest to be really fruitful. The bees are beginning to buzz, and there's a real time of lightness, fun, fertility, and growth. And so this festival in particular was a night affair, all-night affair. And Beltane uniquely focused on that sexuality and sensuality, and so there was kind of a lusty energy that happened. And so we often, you hear that song May, that the lusty month of May, that isn't by accident, This is something that was thought of about May all the time. I mean, we see the bunnies and we see the little creatures walking around. This is a lot of mating is happening right now. So we do kind of think about both the gods and the goddesses being honored at this time. Cernunnos, Green Man, Pan, the Oak King, they're all the gods that are working right now, the horned god, and then the maiden goddesses too. So you're looking at Bridget, and you can say Diana or Artemis or Aphrodite. Now Diana and Artemis, like, they're the same, right? Artemis is the Greek, Diana is the Roman. Actually they're the same goddess, and she was a virgin goddess, and so she has a lot of wonderful myth about her, but so she wasn't honored as like a sexy, like Aphrodite, she's not like that. But there was kind of an honoring of that maiden energy through her. And so the Roman festival of Floralia seems to have influenced the way Beltane was celebrated in the Celtic regions. And so we can kind of think of it that way. So there was a lot of bonfires and singing and dancing, and lots of other kind of things were done to help with fertility. So the smoke from the bonfires was used for purification and vitality. The ashes were placed in the field and mixed with the soil. The Beltane fires are said to have healing properties, and so they were used to grant healing prayers and protection. There's also a way of looking at the fire that they would use. So they would throw bones into the fire, and then read the bones, because this is one of those divination holidays. So, and we think of like Samhain being one and Beltane being the other. So remember, like, all of this scrying and using our tarot decks and using our runes, that is part of Beltane's workings when we do private magical work. So we kind of are looking at this same energy, and we think of Beltane in this way as a fire festival. So bonfires were lit not just for warmth and celebration, but for transformation. Again, fire destroys, but it also blesses, initiates, and renews. It is a true transformative element. So while Beltane doesn't carry the same thinning of the veil energy as Samhain, it's still a liminal time and a threshold time, a crossing point, a moment where what's been growing beneath the surface now shows itself. And so we do divination, like I said, and the reading of the signs and the reading of the earth. So it's not a seed anymore, it's a sprout that's becoming a flower, right? Which means it's ready to procreate. So the question is, for you, like, what is in you that's ready to live? For Beltane, we work with a number of guides, but like Ostera, rabbit usually comes forth as this really powerful guide for fertility. And yes, it's because there's lots of baby bunnies, but not just in the obvious ways. And I kind of talked about rabbit energy, I think, at Ostera, that this was a time when the lunar rabbit was actually like a parent during the day, and that they could have two litters at the same time. So they would have one litter and another one would be growing within them, So, but rabbit is all about creativity and instinct and vulnerability. And so the willingness to step out in the open, even when the world feels very unpredictable. Because think of rabbit, like it lives with this hyper vigilant awareness, and it's yet not paralyzed. It keeps going out and having babies. And so she knows how to find safety. She knows how to return to it. She does not have to stay hidden always. She always goes back out into the meadow again and again, no matter how many hawks dive for her. And there's medicine in that. There's medicine in that, especially for those of us who carry anxiety, trauma, or wounds. Rabbit teaches us something powerful. So you can be aware without being shut down. You can be vulnerable without being unsafe, and you can live out in the open and still belong to yourself. And this is incredibly important for artists, right? For those of us who create and create and create in the, cloistered darkness of our home, when we want to put it out there like, oh, I'm not good enough. We have all these things, right? And so rabbit teaches us that we can be prolific and create and birth and still put it out there, even when we're afraid, even if we have doubt, even if we're feel like small, shaky little creatures. So generating life at a pace that asks us to consider our own relation to creation is part of the medicine of rabbit. So think about right now, what are you making? What are you tending? What are you ready to bring out into the world, even if it's not perfect, or honestly, if it's not fully realized? Creativity, like Beltane itself, is not about control. It's about participation. So other animals for Beltane are honeybee, and you will see bee and community medicine all through summer, all through all those early harvest festivals. So you'll see it at Lammas and Lunazda, and even in Mabon, you'll see honey being a really important part of the festivals. Cat is another one. Stag or deer, a lot of times the stag with the antlers are really important because they're reaching out. They're the intuitive kind of antenna. And then snake for transformation, butterfly for transformation, and goat are all wonderful allies. So if you're someone who likes to work with the energy of the season in like a tangible way through altars or rituals or just how you move through the day, Beltane gives you a whole landscape to play with. It's a fire festival, so you can work with flame, candles, bonfire if you have access. Even the simple act of lighting something with intention, watching it catch, watching it transform, becomes part of the ritual. We use a lot of different colors, but reds, oranges, golds, are all the color of heat and life force and the sacral chakra. Greens too are really important at Beltane because of the lushness and the growth and the too much earth kind of energy, because plants are also abundant, and Beltane leans into that with some plant medicine. We look at red clover and dandelion, lavender and sweetgrass, plants that nourish and soothe and connect us with the land. Even all those humble weeds in your yard, like again, dandelion, calendula is not really a weed around here, but chamomile sometimes grows as weeds, peppermint, mugwort, all those are great. And then, of course, all the flowers of Beltane. We're literally having a flower moon in 2026, the same day. So it's apt. Good flowers for early May are lilac, iris, peony, rose. Even frankincense can be wonderful working with some of the deeper intuitive work we do right now. Food can be a part of it. We're looking at fresh greens and honey and dairy, anything that feels alive and rich and seasonal. Crystals also carry a wonderful energy for this season. Carnelian for creativity, and sacral fire, fire opal, amber, emerald, malachite, jade, rose quartz. You don't need all of them, just one. Something that you're feeling connected to. But if you're working energetically and you're really tied to that sacral chakra, the place of creation, pleasure and sexuality and emotional flow, look at those orange ones. And then if you're working with the heart and accepting and what's growing within you, then you're looking at more of those pink and green crystals. So it's really a beautiful time to work with the themes of creation, fertility, sensuality, pleasure, courage, risk, devotion to what you love, and the willingness to be seen in it. And you don't need a perfect ritual. You don't need all the tools. You just maybe need a moment of awareness, like a lit candle or a breath taken, quiet yes to life. Because Beltane isn't just about fertility, it's about permission to want and to create and to step into a life that feels really alive again. One thing I love about Beltane is that it is fun, and we can kind of celebrate our own unions and have fun with connecting with our partners. And just know that if you are looking at marriage, this is a good time for that. Hand fastings were traditional right now, and also having babies, so all the babies, you should know that if you have a baby that was conceived around Beltane, it's called a Mary begot, and it was thought to be blessed by the gods. So may all your Mary begots be happy and all your couplings be fun. So have a wonderful Beltane.